I have rebranded the show. You may have noticed we are no longer Tales of Teledar on Spotify. We are now Studio Warlock on Spotify. This is because I'm not always going to have the story in Teledar. It might happen in a distant land. It might happen in a nearby land where they call it a different name. Stuff like that. And essentially, I didn't want to be confined to one world and telling stories in that world. I wanted to be able to go like different dimensions and stuff like that. So we are now Studio Warlock. This is the series Legion of Stars, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get on to Chapter 3. Studio Warlock presents Legion of Stars, Chapter 3. Lune and Lumiere find themselves having a remarkably normal day, followed by stunningly strange dreams. Then, off to a rather long day at a sizable city. Lune and Lumiere rode Stardust through the plains and hilllands. They were riding slower now since there were 2 people on the horse. They had to ride through a day and 2 nights until they reached New Rittersfield. The town was a bit larger than Bronston, and a bit warmer. It seemed that the winter was getting less and less severe the further north they went. Lune started to think about this. After a while, he made sense of it. Since there was a blue dragon in the southeast, there would be more storms, so blizzards and snowstorms must have been happening pretty often. Lune was pondering these thoughts as he dismounted and left Stardust at the trough outside the inn. He looked up at the tavern's sign. Blue Devil, it read. Lune shrugged and walked inside. Inside the Blue Devil, there were a few people sitting at small tables that had glass-covered candles casting vivid colored lights across the tables and patrons. Everyone here seemed to move and act slower than outside. It was the early afternoon. They couldn't have been tired. Lumiere nudged Lune. I smell something. Yeah, so do I. That's how noses work. No, it's something different. It's sweet, but almost talks. He was cut off by the bartender. Hello, sirs. What can I do for you? Lune leaned forward over the stool. Just a room. How much would that be? The blue tiefling bartender had yet to open his eyes. Normal room or leisure room? The tender swilled a strange red tea. Lumiere seemed to start nodding along with the time of the man's words. Lune felt a strange fog enter his mind, but shook it out quickly. Normal room. The man's eyes almost imperceptibly opened. Very well. 5 silver. Lune pulled out his purse and handed over 5 silver. A key was slid across the bar with the number 8 on it. Lune pocketed it and led Lumiere out. It was still day, and they had shopping to do. Walking about the town, trying to find a general store, Lune started noticing a sense of strangeness in the townspeople. They moved with a strange flow to their movements. It seemed eerie how smoothly they swayed through the town. Lune found the general store across the small-town plaza. As they walked in, a doorbell rang, and even that seemed slow. Greetings. A slow voice came from behind the counter. What can I do for you, gentlemen? These words came from a young woman behind the counter. She appeared to be half awake, but her eyes tracked Lune and Lumiere far too well. Nearly closed eyes darted from Lune to Lumiere. Hello, miss. We were just looking for some supplies, like field rations. In truth, Lune was a little tired of eating just hunted meat and wanted something to go with it, like cheese and bread. He was at a point where he would eat hardtack, if need be. We have acacia smoked jerky, hibiscus bread, bluebell cheese, and a nice array of traveler's brews. Lune got a strange feeling that he shouldn't purchase anything from this store if he didn't want to look like the people outside, so he feigned looking at the prices. Never mind. Lumiere, let's go. Lune was glad that Lumiere had no money, since he seemed to be falling into the same trance-like state as the populace. He definitely would have bought stuff sold there, and Lune had a less than excellent feeling about the products. Lune made his way to the Blue Devil, now needing to lead Lumiere, which would seem like a normal thing for a blind man, but Lumiere had been traveling without help for the entire journey so far. He was looking around like he could see well, and was staring at a foreign festival, gawking into the sky and looking around in awe. Lune pushed his way through the swinging salon doors of the Blue Devil and made his way to the stairs, avoiding the bartender. He slid the key into the lock and turned it. He then shoved open the door and quickly pushed Lumiere inside. Lumiere quickly fell onto one of the beds, and Lune sat on the other. Almost instantly, Lumiere fell asleep, and the strange fog that was pressing into Lune's mind finally found its way inside. He started feeling tired for the first time in a while. He laid back on the bed, and despite his natural inclination, went to sleep. Sleeping for the first time in about a month felt strange to Lune. He noticed that he had forgotten how to dream. He found himself in a vast expanse. The sky above him, the horizon, stretched out endlessly around him. He was standing in a thin layer of water that reflected the sky and his own figure perfectly. When he stepped, the water rippled out from his foot. Finding nothing to do, he started walking. The wet tapping of his feet across the thin water echoed in the empty void. After 15 or 20 steps, Lune heard another set of footsteps. They sounded like heavy metal boots. Lune whipped around, sword in hand, only now he noticed that he was holding his silver sword, but had nothing of his former possessions. He found himself staring at another Eladrin, this one wearing plate armor with a tunic embroidered with a large symbol of the Ovois family. He stood like a statue of a knight in a mausoleum, standing straight with his sword pointed downwards into the ground. The blade quickly flicked up and flung Lune's out of his hand and onto the ground. Lune summoned it back, and he held it in a low ready position. The tall man took off his visor, revealing his pale skin, white hair, and ice-blue eyes. "That is not the way you should greet your ancestor, boy." Lune stayed in his ready position. "You're not an ancestor. You're just a dream. I dreamt you. I've never met my family." The man stared down at Lune with a blank gaze. "Were my children really raised this stupid? Of course you never met your family. Or at least me. I've been dead for several 100 years. I'm Sembrus Uvois, your great to the power of something like 10 grandfather. You better get used to this, because you have a lot of meetings scheduled. I was sent to be a debriefer, so here we go. Have a seat." 2 chairs made of mahogany rose out of the ground, and a floating mahogany disc appeared with drinks on it. Sembrus gestured to the other chair for Lune to sit. Lune did so, as he lifted a wineglass and sipped the red liquid within. As he finished, the wine replenished itself. Lune slid into the chair. "That seems wildly unhealthy." "Not when you're dead. Let's get down to business. You are an Ovois. Your father could not mentor you, so we're doing it this way. You are a warrior of the moon, servant of Lune. Thankfully, you figured this out quickly on your own intuition. However, you've also made the mistake of hexing Strahd von Zedovich. To be fair, many of your ancestors would have done so in their youths. But now you are cursed, marked by a vampiric stain, so we must send you through a crash course. I do apologize." Lune sipped some of the wine. It was rich. He then spoke. "Please, I am to blame for this curse." The old elf chuckled. "At least there's a cure. 50 years ago, there wouldn't be. It's a shame it costs so much, but no. Your fighting is rushed and sloppy. When it comes to monsters. I have the privilege of watching your first fight. There was passion and vigor in the duel, but it could have been done faster. So I am here to knock some sense into you." Okay. Literally. Lune lurched forward, moving the wine away from his lips. Sembrus's hand started glowing as he smacked Lune across the top of the head. Lune flew several dozen feet away, breaking the chair and landing softly on the top layer of the water. Wisdom score increased by 6. New modifier set to +2. Damn it, that hurt. The armored figure walked over. Sorry, but we aren't done. He helped Lune up and knocked him again. This was not as severe, only sending Lune spinning a few feet. Intelligence score raised by 4. New modifier set to +3. Why? Only way I can do it. Sorry. The old man walked over and held up an old scroll. It unfurled to show a paladin's oath and a warlock's contract. The oath read, Oath of Conquest. Can't really be soft about it. Lune pushed the parchment away. I get it. Again, normally we would do this slower, but you're 49 and have a vampiric mark, so we need to do this quickly. The old elf patted Lune on the cheek, hand still glowing faintly. Charisma score increased by 1. New modifier set to +2. Now, in short, since we have wasted time doing introductions and orientation, we fight primarily the servants of Shah, goddess of darkness, so lycanthropes, the wolf kind, not the werebears and were-ravens, vampires, wendigos, and other things of the like. It is our job to burn these from the face of all lands. That does include Strahd. I am aware that you have orders to kill Bane cultists, but after that is completed, you are scheduled to be handed off to another, Solar. One who directly serves Selyun this time. One note, go into the tower outside first, kill the Baneites, then cure the curse. Keep this order in mind. Now, there's an attractive woman trying to break into your room with her friend. Wake up. Lune's eyes shot open when he heard the clicking of pins and tumblers. Lune summoned his sword silently and readied in bed. He spoke in a loud whisper to Lumiere. Lumiere, wake up. Lumiere's eyes shot open. Did your voice... Shh. Lune sat in wait, and Lumiere seemed to hear the commotion. With trepidation, he raised the bloodied, ornamented stake. Lune got a twitch in his mind. He had a small mental conversation with his patron. He swapped out invocations mentally in a split second and started gazing through the wall. He saw 2 women in scanty dress, with wings. Succubus, Lune said bluntly. Radiant, Lumiere asked. Yes. The stake began to glow a brilliant silver, and 2 glowing silver darts began floating around Lune's head. The door opened, and Lumiere fired off a guiding bolt. The succubus in front shrieked out in agony as the radiance hit her. Then Lune fired off the eldritch blasts. Soaring through the air, the darts of white magic flew into the devil. She vaporized into glowing white particles in front of her companion, who shrieked and started running. Lumiere extended his stake and spoke a word, mouth glowing as before. White chains launched out of the ground and walls around the devil and wrapped around her wings and body. Lune finished her off with his silvered blade. Lune closed the door and locked it again. We need to leave. On the road again? Afraid so. Lune leaned out the window and whistled. Stardust came to the back of the inn and stood ready. Lune prepared to leap out the window. Lumiere cast a spell on himself and floated down from the 2nd floor to the ground. Lune just jumped. Hoisting himself up on the saddle, Lune got a sudden burst of insight. Hibiscus, blue devils, lotuses, lotus eaters, succubi. Lumiere, get off. Aren't we leaving? We need to help this place. After scanning the sleeping town, Lune found one of the entrances. Lune signaled Stardust to run until requested. She did so. Lune placed his hand on the ground. His eyes went silvery, and he saw through the ground. Tunnels, a network of caves and carved passageways, and many people with wings. Lune stood, eyes returning to normal. Dungeon dive. He broke down the door on the way in. Lumiere followed. A small plume of white flames spawned swirling in Lune's hand as he moved forward. They crept through the moist halls, and drips fell from the ceiling. They pressed forward, Eventually hearing footsteps, Lune snuffed the light. He activated his ghostly gaze and started looking through the walls. This is wildly disorienting. What are you doing? Looking through the walls. 2 left, 1 right. Got it. Radiant armor started to coat Lune's body. 2 white gems floated near his head. As they reached a cross-section of the tunnels, the gems darted off in each direction. Lumiere jumped right, and Lune took on the left. They were more devils. They were all the scum that used charm magic on their prey. They all died before they could try any foul magics. Lune stood still for a moment. This way. He directed Lumiere with a tug. Succubi walked around the carved halls, which were slowly looking more and more intentionally built. Flat walls, some with carvings. 2 additional devils walked past a crossroads and were pulled into the darkness, quickly being silenced by 2 shining broadswords. Lune kicked a devil off of his blade. Remarkably anticlimactic, this dungeon. As he said this, the tunnel they were about to enter was filled with flame. Spoke too soon? Lumiere asked. Looks like we're getting closer to the main chamber. Lune tore himself away from the wall and started slinking down the corridor. As they inched their way along, Lune started to see a faint light creep along the walls of the cave. In the distance, there was slow, melodic singing. Lune stopped on a knee, and Lumiere bumped into him. Ears, Lune said. Lumiere reached into a small pouch and put 2 little balls of cotton in his ears. They proceeded further into the depths. The air began to smell of sweet honey, too. Lotus scent. Lune tried to remember everything he learned about the cursed bunch. Lotus eaters, pleasure seekers, wanting naught but vivid dreams and carefree lives obtained through natural narcotics. This troop of devils must have preyed upon the townspeople's weak, drug-ridden minds. They must be using this place as a soul farm. Disgusting. Lune stepped further toward the singing and light, ears plugged. As he approached the main room, he started seeing sconces with torches. He placed his hand on the wall and peered through it. Everything was in range. He closed his eyes and spun his fingers. A gust went through the main hall. In an instant, the torches were relit with a white flame that gave only little light. He used thaumaturgy to make his voice boom. He spoke in Celestial. You have irked me. Shrieking was heard. The devils started running towards the small opening of their great hall. Lune stepped into the now packed opening. He spoke a single arcane word, and the air shifted and bent as the devils were thrown back. He then used a warlock spell charge to cast a licking white radiant flames. All who rushed them died. There were only 5 left. 1 sat on a makeshift throne. Lune walked with Lumiere in tow through the scorched corpses. Come on, boys. What was that for? The devil on her throne said with a sing-song cadence. Lune felt a fog come over his mind, and then his wedding ring sent a shock through his body. Your attempts at charming mean nothing. Lumiere ran ahead. He swung his focus like throwing darts, and 2 bolts flew at the 2 nearest the queen. Lune bolted past, with 2 gems slamming into the now glowing devils. Gut-wrenching shrieks echoed out of the 2 devils as they ran towards Lune. Claws grew from their hands, and they slashed at him. He darted around 3 and caught the one on his cheek. The reminder of combat stung. He hadn't fought in a while. Lumiere snapped his fingers and caught 2 of the devils on fire with radiant flames. He then proceeded to ready his blade at the other 2 succubi. The 2 immediately ran at him. Lune swept his blade through one and into the other near him, and then made his way to the main devil. Lumiere could probably handle himself. Lune swung his sword at the head devil, and an ethereal hand grasped it as she did a small motion. Lune looked over his shoulder to see Lumiere handling himself. He then quickly pulled his sword back and swung again, breaking through the red ghostly hand. The blade sliced through the red skin of the devil like butter. The succubus roared in pain and started making motions with her fingers. Lune snapped the hard silver end of his sheath into the devil's hand, breaking her fingers. Lumiere apparently dealt with the devils around him as he rushed up and stabbed his short sword into the mighty fiend. A blood-curdling shriek came from the succubus as the silver blade entered its skin. Lune went through a series of motions that sliced the monster to bits. Lune whipped out his blade, cleaning the blood off in one motion and sheathing it. He then relit all of the torches in the walls. Also, as is natural for an adventurer, he started looking to see if there was a loot cache. Lumiere spent time setting up all the bodies in a pile and lighting them with radiant flames. Lune found a pile of chests and gold. Nice. He first launched an Eldritch Blast at each chest to make sure that there were no mimics. He then went about looting. In the chests were several gemstones, and a pile of gold had about 100 gold, 120 silver, and 70 copper. A weird assortment of money and valuables, but it was a cache. Lune scanned the gems and found a curious item. An arcane crystal earring. It was cracked, and inside was a small Selune-style star. Whose was this? A wave of insight slammed into Lune's mind. This is the focus of St. Nicole Everdark. Why is it here? He wondered. Lune identified the item as a well-made and well-used focus. Obtained Arcane Focus +1 Heritage Item. Lumiere had apparently finished up and walked over to another chest. He cracked it open and took off his blindfold. He held items close to his eyes as he investigated them. He wound up finding a few daggers that were long and thin. Looks like a noble's defense weapon, he said. Lune looked over. They must have been harvesting off of travelers. That fight was easy, though. They must have only been here for a few months. Lune threw the coins into his bag and pinned the earring into his ear. He then lifted a chest of gems and hoisted it over his shoulder. He directed Lumiere to take the other one. Lumiere put his blindfold back on and hoisted up the chest. They walked out of the catacombs and up to a location behind an overgrown church. Lune turned and saw the symbol on the outer wall under the overgrowth. He could make out two symbols next to each other. One a blade pointed down, Torm. The other an open gauntlet with a stylized eye on its back, Helm. Lune extended his left hand upwards. May the god of valor and the god of protection be praised. Both divine protection and fury have been dispatched today. Thy names be praised. He added a little umph with thaumaturgy at the end. Then he turned back to an open field. He knelt and touched the grass to see through the obstructions. Where the town should have been, there was rubble and ruins. Good going with all those heroics. Now get going to all your real plans. Now, or you won't have the time you want in Hereford. Lune whistled, and Stardust came so fast it was almost like she just appeared. He emptied the chest into his bag of holding now that they were safe. Lune and Lumiere then both mounted and headed off to Ravenven, feeling remarkably exhausted. They wound up setting camp in a small dugout off the beaten road. They set off again at dusk. It took around 3 days riding north just to get to Ravenven. It was around dawn when they arrived at the west gate. They saw the guards switching posts on the city walls and near the front gate. As they rode up, Lune remembered how militant this city and its sister cities were. He recalled the armor-clad diplomats saying that their utilitarian armor was formal dress. The walls were immense, and as each guard came into view, their markings became visible. On the right pauldron of each guard, there was a symbol of Helm, and on their chests was the crest of Ravenven, a stylized left profile of a raven's head. Lune approached the gate. "Oi there," one of the gate guards called as Lune and Lumiere approached. "What are you doing about here, then?" Lune halted Stardust and dismounted, walking up to the guard. "Good day, sir. We are just traveling, trying to make our way to Hereford from the south." "Right. I'm going to need some names, just to be sure you ain't criminals." "Well, the man still on the horse is Lumiere, no surname, and I am Lune, Lune of Voice." The guard pulled out a scroll. Lune read the header through the thin paper. It was weird to read backwards, but he made out it said, "Wanted." Weirdly, it also stated in a rather large subtitle, "Incarcerate anyone wearing Union armor. Non-lethal force is allowed." And then continued to much smaller text that proved impossible to read through the scroll. The man eyed Lune suspiciously. The guard rolled up the scroll. "Well, sir, you don't appear to be on any of the lists. Come on in. Welcome to Ravenven." Lune remounted and rode through the thick city walls. The fortress town sprawled out around them. Lune and Lumiere were on the main road that went straight through the city. As they approached the main plaza, they saw that another thick wall that took up the northern edge of the plaza. Other notable places were a stand for the town crier. Opposite the immense inner wall was a 3-story high tavern made of stone for the first floor and wooden planks holding up the 2 upper floors. Above the door hung a black sign with white paint that read, "The Crown's Ale House." As they approached the center of the open plaza, Lune spotted that the gate to the inner wall was open, and behind was a keep with several spires pointing like lances into the sky. Lune turned off and dismounted outside the tavern. He pushed his way through the doors. The place was packed for the early morning, and the air was rich with the scent of teas and coffee. For the first time in a while, Lune saw things like low-level traders setting up a shop at large tables, old men playing magic dragon chess on their day off, and travelers sitting around tables planning their journeys or holed up in the tavern to escape the morning cold. Lune and Lumiere walked to a small table out of the way and waited for service. Eventually, a large halfling came to the table. He wore leather boots and a leather vest over commoner's clothes. The leather vest had a small crown embroidered in the left lapel. Messy hair covered his head and a scruffy beard clung to his chin. He placed a menu on the table. "What'll it be, gents?" Lune picked up the menu. "Elysium, you have eggs?" The server smiled. "Yes, we do, good sir. Fresh from the farms just outside of town." Lune went wild, ordering precious foods. 3 scrambled eggs with bacon, milk, and coffee with cream for me, please. He handed the menu to Lumiere, who pushed up his blindfold. "Oh dear," Lumiere muttered, eyes wide. "Fried potatoes with cheese and poached eggs. Oh, and green tea." The waiter took the menu. "Thank you for your patronage. There'll be 15 silver. Lune handed over the money. "Thank you, sir. I will go place your orders. There will be a complimentary half-loaf of bread coming your way shortly." Then the little man walked off behind the bar. After a moment he came back out with bread, butter, and jam, then left again. Lune spent time eating and eavesdropping. Some of the patrons were talking in hushed tones around the table nearby. A man spoke to his friend. "Have you heard about what Townmaster Lorenzo is planning?" His friend spoke up. "Do you mean working on the sabotage?" "Yes. Apparently, he's thinking about hiring the help of those cons." The second man spit on the floor. "Disgusting," he said. Lune caught sight of the first man leaning backwards, sipping wine. "Well, they need funding. Where else might they get it?" "Still," his friend continued, 30 deeds with 30 people. Lune stopped listening and started devising a plan to screw over Alessiano Khan as much as possible. Eventually, the food came, and both savored every bite. Potatoes were not a rarity to Lumiere, but well-cooked ones, and cheese were. Breakfast took upward of 15 minutes while they drank and ate what was normal food, but now tasted like delicacies. After a small feast, Lune walked up to the bar and hired a room for the night. The burly bookkeeper flipped through a page in his large archive book. "Great, that'll be 2 gold. Thank you. Here's the key. We appreciate your patronage." Lune met Lumiere outside, reading a small disclaimer that came with the room key. "Huh, we get free wine." Lumiere turned to the sound of Lune's voice. "What are we going to be doing today?" Lune pulled the paper into his pocket. "Well, I have one true enemy in my life, and his name is Alessiano Khan. He screwed me over once, and now he has made a mortal enemy. I recently, meaning today, learned that there's an opportunity to destroy a business opportunity for this mafia boss. So that is what we will be doing today. Lumiere started following Lune, who was now walking towards the keep across the plaza. And how are we going to be doing this? Lune smiled. Well, back in Bronston I dug up some old memories. One of them was of some old diplomat friends, a couple of which were from here, Erenzu, the current master, and Zibignu, his son. I am hoping to speak with one of those two. By this time they had reached the inner wall which surrounded the large keep. 2 guards put spears in their way in an X. These 2 were old veterans with scarred faces and thick, well-worn armor. Name and business, the one with both eyes said gruffly. Luna voice, I wish for counsel with the town master and his son. The one-eyed man turned and spoke. Sorry, lad. Can't go and see the family now. Lune stepped back, confused. Why not? Down business. Move along. Lune rolled his eyes and walked away. He started scouting the walls around the keep. They were high, 2 times taller than every nearby building, but it wasn't spiked on top, so it could be jumped. Lune found a shaded spot with Lumiere in tow. He instructed Lumiere to keep watch. How? Lune extended the tome and a quill. Write your name here, then we can talk through the book. What? I can write things and you'll hear them in your mind. When you respond, it will appear in writing here. Lumiere signed the page. Great. Now act like a poor man and respond when I ask if it's safe to cross over. Got it. Lumiere slid down so his back was against the wall. Be safe, friend. Lune placed his hand on the wall and started seeing through it. Clear. Squatting and stretching, Lune leapt from the wall to a nearby building. He jumped back and forth until he landed on top of the building. Tapping into the Fey within him, Lune stepped forward. He now found himself on a snowy hill in the Feywild. He ran up the incline and snapped back into the material. He was now on top of the wall. It was a 30-foot drop. Lune readied himself. You've done this before? He took a couple of deep breaths and leapt off the wall. For the first 20 feet, the jump went smoothly, until his foot snagged on a protruding brick in the wall. Lune fell on his shoulder and into a bush. After a bit of flailing, he made his way out of the bush. Crouching low, Lune slinked his way to the keep. Once he got to the wall, Lune made himself as thin as he could. He touched his hand to the wall and looked inside. The wall went wispy, and Lune saw nothing through it. Clear. Lune took out 2 knives, dug them into the wall, and started climbing. He got to a window and double-checked the area. No guard. In fact, this place looked like a massive living space. Like 3 taverns put into one with the amount of tables and chairs. Lune wedged the window open with a dagger and slid through the small opening. This time he landed silently. The room was empty, besides the furniture. He crept his way through the massive empty room and put his back to a door he was rather certain went to the main foyer. Again, touching the wall, he now saw 2 guards behind the wispy image of the wall. Lune sat and focused for a moment. He spoke a word while seeing through the wall. Suddenly, the guards' breaths started fogging through the wall. They began shivering in their armor. Lune stopped looking through the wall and started listening. Bloody cold all of a sudden, one guard grumbled. The other guard started rubbing his hands together. That's strange. You want to go for a quick coffee? Absolutely. Lune started hearing footsteps approaching. He looked through the wall to see them drawing nearer. He quickly rose and put his back to the wall, near the door. He praised Celian when the door opened towards him, obscuring him from view. Sadly, the guards didn't travel far, as he thought they would. They went off to the bar rather nearby, where they would definitely see him. Lune looked off in the opposite wall and threw a sound of breaking glass over there. The guards twitched and turned to the sound. Is some kid throwing rocks again? We'll have to go and check. Come on. They walked off to the location of the sound. Lune slinked around the door and left it right where it was. The foyer, too, was open and empty. Now no one was here, so Lune just walked further down the main entrance. At the end of the large empty hall, he saw a circular staircase. Lune crept up the stone steps and peered around the second floor. The area was better furnished, but still vast and empty. Lune continued, sneaking along the carpets. He risked a peek around a corner into a hallway. A guard in half-plate was traversing the hall. Lune snapped back around the corner, praying he wasn't spotted, and put his new bag on the floor and started searching through it to see what he could use. He came across a strange bag of powder. Putting a little on his fingertip, he bent down and smelled it. A strange drowsiness came over him. His eyes went wide. The sleeping powder from Southlight, he thought. Then he came up with an idea. Taking a pinch of the powder, he rubbed it along the edge of his finger. Then he used a spell to throw a noise down the carpet that came out of the hall. However, the guard did not seem to notice, so Lune crept up behind the guard. Quickly, his hand came out in front of the guard's face, and he ran the line of sleeping powder under his nose. The guard collapsed backwards into Lune, who hauled him into a dark corner. Lune kept sneaking down the hall. He tried a rather fancy-looking door. It opened, and Lune made his way inside. The door clicked softly behind him, and Lune found himself in a rather large library. Walking about the carpeted room, he saw that most of the books were histories of Polska and Ravenven. This room also was rather large and filled with unused furniture, desks, and square study tables. It stretched into the upper floor with a wide balcony that hung over the edge of the room. The room was lit with oil lanterns and a large crystal chandelier. Lune continued near the wall of the room until he heard a door open. He froze, now realizing that he needed to be much quieter. He crept into the shadows near the wall and waited. A man in regal dress walked into the room, followed by a thinner individual in the same form of utilitarian noble dress. "I don't like it, Father," the slim individual said. The bulky framed figure sat down at one of the tables, his back to Lune. I know. It is bad. I don't trust the man or his family. He is a snake, but he is desperate, and we are too. The younger man sat down beside the bulky noble. I just don't like that we are putting suicide mission in the hands of a scoundrel like that. Plus, I get the feeling that he is trying to play both sides of the war. The question is, what side does he actually back? Lune found himself walking forward and speaking. The question is, do you need to trust him? The two men shot out of their seats and turned to Lune. They temporarily looked confused as they saw him. The younger man, Zbigniew, spoke first. Lune? Lune gave a courteous Polskan bow. Townmaster Erenzu, Zbigniew, it is a pleasure to see you again. Erenzu spoke. Young man, how did you get in here? For being a fortress, your security isn't real great at keeping people out who really want to get in. I am only here to speak with you both, hopefully, to convince you out of working with the cons. Erenzu sat back down in his chair and directed Lune to another. How do you suppose we do that, lad? We are planning a rather tricky mission and need funding. How else do you suppose we work around this? Lune parked himself in the chair. Well, firstly, you shouldn't be doing business with that snake. For what little investigation we were allowed to do, we spotted one of his specialists in the room of Sevesi, where he was killed. May he forever fall in Yizgat. The information leads me to believe that he was behind it in a way. Also, you still have Everfall between you and the Union. Oh, and you don't need funding from him if you will take it from me. We need a lot of gold, kid. Lune put his bag of holding on the table. I can do you one better than gold, he said as he raised 6 heavy bags out of the small personal dimension. He laid them on the table and opened the drawstrings. The gems overpowered the sides of the bags and spilled onto the table. I am willing to give you these so you don't have to deal with that scoundrel. Son, called the jeweler. Zbigniew bolted out of his chair and left the room. After a moment, he returned with a bespectacled man carrying a bag of tools. The man sat down and unwrapped his bag of artisan tools. He went over one of the rubies. After a moment, of quiet inspection, the jeweler adjusted his glasses. This one alone is worth at least 10 platinum. I could trust that the others are of equal value. This man has thousands of platinum in gems here. Thank you, Tamil. You know the way out. The jeweler collected his tools, shoved up his spectacles, and walked out of the library. What do you want for this? Lorenzo asked, and after a moment, Lune leaned forward. Just take it as an apology. I did not do what I set out to in Stormwind, and now you and Savasi's son have had no closure. I only ask that you do one thing with the money. Win. Or at least beat a lasting scar into the Union and the Khans. We will fight with the strength of the ancients. Lune stood. Good. Now, I must be off. I am looking to finish winter in Hereford, for magical research reasons, and then I need to go north. We may never meet again, friends, but if we do, I pray that we will meet in glory and victory. Townmaster Lorenzo stood and extended a remarkably muscular hand. Until we meet again, should I have some men to see you out? Lune shook his hand and smiled. No, I'd like to leave my own way. You really should fortify your keep guards against magic, though. You don't have the brightest individuals on your payroll. The townmaster grunted something like, hard to find help nowadays. Lune then leapt to the stationary bookshelf and across the balcony railing. Then he leapt across the room to a window. Unlatching it and throwing himself through, he landed on the top of the wall outside the keep. He then stepped off the thick stone wall and slid down, landing quietly. He started looking for Lumiere. Then he remembered the book. I'm out. Where are you? He wrote. After a moment, text appeared on the page. Here. I see you. Look for the light. Lune looked around and eventually saw a man covered in filth and rags holding a glowing rock. Lune walked up. What did you do? Lumiere started brushing the filth and debris. Blending in, like you said to. Well, let's get you cleaned up and go shopping. Lune started casting spells, helping Lumiere wipe off the various forms of filth he used to look like a homeless man. Once they finished, they returned to the main plaza. Lune started looking for the Courier's Guild building and an alchemy shop. He found the guild first. Walking into a large building, there was a doorbell that did ring, but was nearly muffled by the workers calling out orders and names, and a remarkable amount of citizens responding to said calls. Bells rang and horsemen and pigeons arrived to deliver letters, which were quickly sorted and delivered. Lune stepped over to one of the small writing desks and drafted a letter. Who are you writing to? Lumiere asked. My wife. You're married? Yes. Lune wrote a letter quickly. It was mostly an update on his adventure and finished in an apology for not writing sooner. He took one of the paper packages and wrapped up a fire topaz from the gem hall. He then entered the queue to deposit mail. Over all the noise, Lune somehow heard a courier groan. Oh, not this one again. Package for Lune of Weiss. Lune raised his hand from where he was in the queue. A young man walked over. This one's been in circulation for a while. He handed Lune a clipboard. Lune signed for the package. He was handed a long package wrapped in brown paper, with a letter tied on with twine. For some reason, no one could find you. It's been floating about for 2 or so weeks now. Lucky you, you're here when we happen to have it again. Good day. And the courier walked back to take incoming mail. Lune took off and read the letter. It was signed Johansson. Putting out a pocket knife, he read the letter. Hey, lads. Young of Weiss, I have wondrous news. The trip to Mo's Ferry was not in vain, and my bounty hunters and I have emerged victorious in capturing the thieves. Those sticky-fingered cultists did not know that they were dealing with the great scholar and warrior Johansson. Okay, sure, I had help, but whatever. In the end, I escaped that hellhole with the sword which is being wrapped by my loving wife as I write. Inside the package you presumably hold now is the dancing blade you bought long ago. Treat it well. P.S. Instructions for attunement are included on the page behind this. Farewell, friend. Lune read this wide-eyed and tore a bit of the paper. Underneath, he saw the pine-green cloth and gold accents. He covered it again and found it difficult to hide his excitement. This was the sword that he paid several thousand platinum for. It felt like it had been so long ago that he bought it even after it was stolen. He should probably hide it while he was in the city, so he quietly tucked it under his coat. The line progressed forward, and Lune eventually delivered the letter and small box. He put the payment on the counter, and both gold and delivery disappeared with the attendant. Lune then left and walked with Lumiere to the city billboard. Finding a town map, Lune ran down the list of names until he found an alchemy shop. He located the name on the map and headed off to the park in the northeast sector. As they walked, Lumiere asked some questions. "Why are we headed to an alchemy shop?" "I'm looking for supplies," Lune said. "According to this book, I can make some pretty deadly poisons that I think I can mix with powdered purified silver to make extra damaging to undead. Also, I wish to make more powders. Today went well because of one I was carrying, but I don't have much more of it." "Ah, I see." They continued then in silence. After about an hour of walking through alleys and getting lost, they arrived in the park near the shop. Walking in, Lune saw another halfling. He greeted them as he went about taking expensive items off of shelves, wrapping up for the day. Lune searched through the small store and started buying things. The end tally came up to 100 gold that the halfling was surprised to see actually paid. They then left and headed to their room at the Crown's alehouse. Walking up and entering a room, Lumiere quickly walked to the bed and laid down. Lune took the cushion off of a chair in the room and placed it on the floor. Lumiere stared at the ceiling before falling asleep. "Where are we going tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we'll be heading off to Hereford. It should take only a couple of days to get there." "Okay. Good night, Lune." "Night, Lumiere." As Lumiere drifted to sleep, Lune pulled the paper-wrapped package out of his coat. Peeling back the brown paper, he unveiled the gilded elvish katana. He removed the paper wrapping and laid the sword on the floor. Looking at the second page of the letter, he found instructions on how to attune to the blade. It said that it was a dancing blade, and thus needed a song to dance to. If it liked it, the blade would bond with the singer, but only if the singer wanted to bond with it. Lune began to sing and play an old elvish lullaby, a song about the past and its struggles, but how those would shape a person to deal with the future better. Slowly the sword floated out of its scabbard. It began to slowly dance with its sheath to the rhythm of Lune's song and lyre. As the melody ended, it rested itself in Lune's belt under his jacket. He felt the connection and remained meditating on the pillow for the full night. Legion of Stars is written and produced by Alex Peer. The world of Teledar has been created by one Luke Warner. I would like to also thank my editor, who I will not mention by name, but you know who you are, and you have saved me just a whole lot of writing problems. And also, there are a few more things. This has been Chapter 3. If you like this, then you can leave us a rating on Spotify, because apparently Spotify has ratings. You can also go over to anchor.fm/AlexPeer and leave a 5-star review. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, you can go down, hit that little like button, and why not subscribe while you're there? And also, if you're not there, why not go over to YouTube and hit the subscribe button so you get updates whenever I upload stuff. We have weekly videos. Also, I have a Patreon if you want to start just paying me. Every time you'll get the script as soon as I finish it, or as soon as I finish recording, I should say, because that's when I do final edits, and not any later, so you'll actually wind up probably getting next script a couple of weeks ahead of time, and this script is going up about a week before the recording will go live. But until then, we here at Studio Warlock would just like to say. Safe travels, and happy hunting.